These men are in training. They prepare for unknown battles that may occur anywhere around the globe, day in and day out. Their orders can come at any time. And when they do, these troops will be sent to protect American interests abroad. And they will stay for as long as it takes, until they're called home. Today's soldier doesn't fight alone. He has behind him the might of each of the armed services. This means not only the manpower, but all the weaponry and the technology of those services. Today, to fight effectively, men in the field must coordinate and concentrate the firepower of their forces as never before. This means, in practice, unprecedented cooperation between air and ground forces. And this kind of teamwork has been growing since World War II, but it became the hallmark of the Vietnam War. In this program, we'll bring you a tale of the Vietnam War. For purposes of illustration, it's a fictional tale, but it's built upon a foundation of many, many real stories. It illustrates the complexities and the conflicts, the courage that typified the struggles of the American fighting man in Southeast Asia. Here, then, are three men. A staff sergeant who leads a search and destroy patrol. A helicopter-gunship pilot who provides escort and close support. And the pilot of an F-4 Phantom jet. A man who brings with him all the thundering power and destructive force of an airstrike. Each is doing his own job, but each man's job will bring him to the same place at the same time to fight the same enemy. Here is their mission: Vietnam.
Hot and dusty's the way I remember it. For some reason, it hadn't rained for over a month, and the dried mud just turned to dust. You'd be drenched in sweat so the dust would stick to your body, cake up on your face. We were building our fortress in Vietnam, our fire base. Everybody had to pitch in. I was staff sergeant to one tough squad of men, and we all busted our guts filling sacks with dirt and building walls of stacked bags. It was miserable hard work, but it had to be done. There were no fixed front lines, everybody knew that. So we built fire support bases around the country. There were a lot of them. I'll call this one Fire Base Ferdinand. They were like outposts. Old Western forts built in Indian country. John Wayne and Randolph Scott would have liked them. Inside the concertina wire, they were packed full of big guns, howitzers, and other artillery. Lots of 105s, mortars, emplacements for machine guns, and whatever else we needed. The 155mm howitzers were the heart of our offensive power. Give them the right coordinates, these suckers could drop a shell well over 4 to 5 miles and drop it on a chicken. Whenever possible, the bases were built on hilltops, someplace with a good view of the surrounding terrain. It was a self-contained outpost from which other operations, mostly sweeps for enemy troops, could be launched. Ideally, the fire bases were constructed close enough to each other that each base was within firing range of at least one other. That way, when a base came under attack, it could get supporting fire from one or more bases nearby. The Viet Cong thought the more remote fire bases were tempting targets. Some of the most vicious fighting of the war took place at these bases. When you're low man on the totem pole in an operation this big, it's hard to make sense out of everything that goes on. You sort of have to hunker down and do the job you're told to do. There ain't no point in trying to figure out why. You just gotta hope that the guy above you knows what he's doing and isn't just some pogue behind a desk in Saigon. Life at a fire base could be deadly dull when there was no action in your area. Patrols were sent out and the big guns were maintained. Details went out on civic action projects to help pacify the local populace to win their hearts and minds. That could involve anything from digging a new village well to providing medical treatment for children. But sometimes you just had a lot of time on your hands. Time to read, play cards, or polish old shell casings. And at times like this, I'd get real nervous. The short-timer sticks would get down to the last notch, and they'd rotate out, and then I'd get a bunch of fresh boots in my squad. Guys just out of boot camp. Straight from advanced infantry training. These guys would be green and untested. Before long, there'd be only a few men in the squad who'd seen actual combat. And you knew that sooner or later the quiet would pass, and you'd get caught out in the field with nothing but a bunch of FNGs, new guys, protecting your back, and that's when all hell would break loose. It wasn't a good feeling. That's the feeling I was getting on this particular day. We had orders to take a squad out for a sweep to the north of our base. We were the second patrol out. This was going to be a long walk for us, so we packed up our gear. We were supposed to check out a former Viet Cong base in a remote area some 6 miles north of the fire base. There was some intelligence that indicated that there might be new activity there. We were supposed to check it out, but otherwise it was just another search and destroy trip. The area was nothing but jungle and mountains. The local tribes were called Montagnards, a very different sort of people than the Vietnamese you find in the lowlands. But their settlements were farther to the west. The area directly to the north was defined as a free fire zone. Any strangers you met out there were assumed to be enemy. That was the policy. So we headed out from Fire Base Ferdinand in a straight line. I put a new cherry-faced guy on point. He hadn't been with us long, but he had real sharp eyes. It was business as usual, just like any other day in Vietnam.
The second man in this tale is the pilot of a UH-1 helicopter gunship, a man who had many duties to fulfill in a day's work.
We were stationed at a base about a half hour from Fire Base Ferdinand. When they needed to call on choppers, we were there, at least as many as were available. Sometimes our gunships and attack helicopters were supporting a dozen different operations at once. Each Huey gunship carries a crew of 4 men, a pilot, co-pilot, and 2 gunners. The crew and I spent a lot of time escorting the more lightly armed helicopters called slicks that carried troops and supplies. A lot of supplies. Just about everything was transported by helicopter in this area. We were stationed near the coast, next to the rice paddies. If you went very far inland, there was nothing but forest and a few trails. No roads or nothing. On the 25th of January, we had returned from a major troop drop in the south. That had kept us busy all morning. But we weren't done for the day. A CH-47 was headed out to Ferdinand with medical supplies and stuff. Intelligence was predicting that area would see increased action this month. They wanted gunships to escort all flights in and out of the area. So after refueling and downing a cup of coffee apiece, we piled back in and took off to meet the transport. Most of the route was flown above 2,500 feet. Below was just lots of trackless jungle. From that height, it looked like a thick pile carpet that just spread for miles. A lot of people I meet seem to think Vietnam is a tiny country like some of those in Central America. but that's not true. South Vietnam is twice the size of Panama, with a coastline about the same as the distance from New York City to Savannah, Georgia. As we got closer, we came down, passing over another fire base to the south of Ferdinand. After landing, we checked in with the XO, who's a friend of mine. He had some hot news for us. 2 patrols had been sent out that day, and one of them, a long-range reconnaissance patrol, LRP for short, had made a discovery. What appeared to be a force of North Vietnamese regulars advancing through a valley southwest of the firebase. Real NVA. That's the North Vietnamese army, and lots of them. Now that was news. The enemy had been observed without realizing they'd been discovered. Headquarters wanted us to stay put and wait while they sent over some Hueys to drop infantry from Firebase Ferdinand, behind the advancing NVA. At the same time, a force of men would advance on foot from the base. When the NVA came up against the ground force, they'd find themselves pinched from behind. Once they were caught in a narrow valley between the 2 forces, we'd be able to lay artillery fire on them with pinpoint accuracy. It looked like it should be an easy operation, but in this country, experience breeds caution. We'd believe it when we saw it. The choppers arrived from base along with another gunship. As we took off, the ground troops that would approach the North Vietnamese head-on had begun to move out. Our path was an L-shaped route that would take us far enough behind the NVA so that we'd remain unseen and unheard, we hoped. The success of this hammer and anvil operation could depend on how much of a surprise it was for our friends from the north. They weren't likely to continue moving in a predictable direction if they got wind of what we were up to. I'd seen it before. They'd intercept the right radio message or something, and by the time you got to where they should have been, they'd just vanished. We didn't want that to happen today. This time, the insertion of our troops went off without a hitch. We circled the landing zone, ready and waiting to cover the boys on the ground, but they didn't need it. The LZ, that stands for landing zone, was cold. They grouped up near the edge of the small clearing and moved out in the direction of the NVA. Then we headed back to our home base to refuel. After that, we got sent right back to Ferdinand to wait nearby, just in case we were required to pull these guys out real fast. It was getting to be a long day.
Now you've met the first 2 characters in our story. Before we proceed, we'd like you to meet the 3rd man, though he did not become involved in the events surrounding Fire Support Base Ferdinand until much later in our tale.
My job? It's a delivery job. Sounds funny, I'm told, but that's how we'd refer to it to each other. We carried rockets and bombs of all kinds, 250 and 500 pounders, also APAMs, delayed action bombs, and napalm. Delivered them to specific coordinates. Much of the time we were doing this in very close proximity to our own troops. You had to be precise. Everything counted on that. It took infinite concentration, and if it went all to hell, it happened very fast. We're the Marines, not the Air Force. Those Marine air bases that were located in country, like the carrier base squadrons, primarily supported Marine operations. The protection of Army grunts, like the ones out of Firebase Ferdinand, would normally be an Air Force job. But then there was so much inter-service action going on that nothing like that could be written in stone. Marine fighter attack squadrons had helped in the evacuation of Green Berets from the Ashaw Valley back in 1966. In other actions, we supported both U.S. Army and ARVN troops of South Vietnam. Airstrikes are expensive, but they're cheaper than lives lost. When the grunts were in the field beyond the range of artillery and met heavy resistance, they'd call for an airstrike on the coordinates of the opposing force. There was a standard procedure for determining need and priority for airstrikes, which was all done by radio. Once a strike had been approved, we'd be there in minutes. Our F-4B Phantom IIs had been designed as fighter interceptors, but the Phantom had proven itself highly capable in a variety of missions, not the least of which was air support. We carried 5,000 pounds of ordnance under this twin-engine bird. A-4 Skyhawks were limited to a payload of 3,000. Typical airstrikes would be flown by 2 or sometimes 4 Phantoms carrying a mixed variety of weapons, so we could hit the Viet Cong or NVA in almost any terrain. When you're attacking from a low level, you grit your teeth and ride straight over the target. The weapons officer has his hand on the button, ready to pickle the bomb at just the right moment. That's pickle, as in dropping it right in the old pickle barrel. Then immediately you'd pull up and out, turn around, and you could watch your wingman deliver the next package of fireworks. When you returned to base, like as not, the planes would be turned around and readied right away. That left you sitting, on alert, waiting for the next call. During a sustained battle like the Battle of Khe Sanh, you'd be flying constantly, along with everyone else. We had really been in demand. Right now, it was the final phase of the lunar year. The Tet, or Vietnamese New Year, was only a little ways off. Charlie, that's slang for the Viet Cong, was supposed to be thinking about celebrations. So we didn't expect anything big to happen until after the Tet. As it turned out, we were wrong.
The initial action at Fire Support Base Ferdinand did not involve the F-4 Phantom pilot. It was planned as a coordinated infantry and artillery attack upon the North Vietnamese Army detachment that was sited 6 miles southwest of the base. 2 groups of American troops were assigned to this operation. The first, advancing directly on foot. The second, airlifted around the NVA by helicopter and inserted several miles away from the NVA so that they could advance from behind.
The hammer and anvil was a common tactic used in Vietnam. The Viet Cong, and to some extent the NVA, were reluctant to engage in extended battle unless they felt that they possessed an overwhelming advantage. In the best tradition of guerrilla warfare, they preferred to pick their own battles, and most frequently attacked by ambush or with quick hit-and-run engagements, dissolving afterwards back into the jungle from whence they came. So when any sizable force of communist troops could be located, the first rule the Americans followed was to fix their location, to place the enemy between the hammer and the anvil. This prevented the enemy forces from disengaging. Then, and only then, could the full force of American firepower be brought to bear.
The engagement with the NVA force southwest of Fire Support Base Ferdinand appeared to be a textbook operation. The 2 American forces met the NVA at almost the same time. Immediately, coordinates were radioed to the FSB. Artillery fire started raining down on the NVA, and they reacted quickly. When they first made contact, they pulled back until they ran into the force behind them. Now that the shells were coming down right in their midst, the NVA pushed at the perimeter the Americans had established. This was a big enough force to make some trouble, possibly a full company. It was clear they were out to do more than just recon work, and they fought fiercely. They weren't going to capitulate quickly or easily. After the first barrage, American troops advanced cautiously. They got a pile of hot lead thrown at them. The NVA were still there. This was going to take a while.
Meanwhile, my patrol was having a nice, dull time of it. We had advanced quietly and cautiously, trading off the point position, always looking out for the possible ambush. It's a naked feeling walking point man for a squad in the bush. In actuality, the casualty rate for men on point isn't all that much worse than for anybody else on a search and destroy mission. If you do walk into a Viet Cong trap, they're likely to let the point man in along with everyone else. They'd wait until the whole squad came within range before opening fire. The most dangerous thing walking point is that you're more likely than the others to run into booby traps. Nasty things, those. And they've got a million variations on the theme. Everything from fingered charges on a fish line to covered pits lined with punji stakes. Sharpened pieces of bamboo stuck in the ground and covered with poisons or excrement, so that any wounds would come with infection guaranteed. Pleasant thought. Keeps your eyes wide open, keeps you alert. No one in my squad ever fell asleep while they were on point. Still, for us, this trip had been pretty quiet. We didn't run into anyone on our way out. At the former Viet Cong base, all we found were the flattened remains of a few huts. No signs of new tunnels or diggings. Just as we left it 6 months before, when we cleared it out. When the radio man, we called him an RTO, transmitted this bit of stunning information, base responded with the news about the action down south. Sounded like fun, but I wasn't heartbroken that we'd missed out. We were on our way back when we got our own surprise. I hate to think it, but I believe we'd gotten a little careless. In Vietnam, sometimes there's so much nothing happening for so long that after a while it's almost impossible not to be a little careless. We were sort of diddy-bopping along when all of a sudden the point man gave out a yell and there was gunfire. I saw the blur of a green uniform to my right where it shouldn't be. Then AK rounds started zipping past me and hitting dirt and trees. There were shouts and more gunfire. Our own M16s. The group of us started to back up. In the distance, through the tree trunks and foliage, we could see flashes of movement. Lots of it. At least 3 times as many men as in our squad. North Vietnamese regulars in uniform. It was time to back off and fast. We pulled back a short distance. From in front, we could still hear a few odd rounds of gunfire and then sharp commands, I guess, to halt fire. It seemed like maybe they'd been just as surprised as we were. Immediately, my RTO got on the horn while we tried to figure our exact coordinates. They knew we were here, and I had a hunch they'd find out we were only a small patrol. It was only a matter of time before all hell broke loose.
A new and dangerous element had entered the picture. A second NVA force of undetermined size had been discovered by Eagle 6 Patrol. This posed an immediate threat to the small patrol, but there was also danger indicated by the presence of 2 sizable enemy forces in close proximity to the fire support base. The gunship pilot was still waiting at Ferdinand, and the battle with the first NVA force southwest of the base was still underway. The information that the staff sergeant of Eagle 6 Patrol radioed in will lead to a new assignment for the crew of the Huey gunship.
Outside the bunkers, the big boys were sending shells south in impressive numbers. We were down in the command bunker listening to the exchanges between the forward controller and the firebase, when all of a sudden there was news from another patrol. A squad that had been sent out on a search and destroy to the north. Seems they'd run into some trouble, an NVA force of undetermined size. We were witness to some quick talk. This meant there were two forces, both NVA in the vicinity. Didn't sound like a coincidence. The commander gave a call to our home base. He wanted to send us out along with an OH-6, commonly called a Loach, to check out this new force and look for any other enemy troops along with some extra gunships for good measure. In no time, a Loach was on the way, and we joined on him for a pink team mission.
A pink team was a 2-helicopter reconnaissance mission. The OH-6 Cayuse worked as a low-level search aircraft. The little chopper flew low, following trails, flying fast over likely enemy positions, getting in close to examine any clearings. He was vulnerable, but not as easy a target as you might think. For low-level flying also means that you're not visible for more than a few moments over any one spot on the ground. But in the short time that you are visible, you present the enemy with a large, tempting silhouette. The irony was that you wanted him to fire at you. A few hurried gunshots would be likely to miss, but they would confirm your adversary's presence and his precise location. That's where the second chopper came in. A gunship stood off at a distance, watching the movements of the OH-6. If the Cayuse got fired at, the gunship could take aim and would provide enough suppressive fire so the OH-6 could move off. Then you could launch grenades into the bush to take care of the immediate threat, or call in artillery to cover a larger area as need be.
We still had a full load of ammo on board, so we were ready for anything. We reached the area where our patrol was supposed to be. By this time, the artillery from the fire base had swung around and sent a barrage of fire to the coordinates radioed in. After one good volley of shells, Ferdinand turned its howitzers back on the NVA unit to the south, still its major priority. Eagle 6 had pulled back about 200 yards, but they were waiting for us before advancing any further. We switched our radio over to the arranged frequency and found them. They directed the Loach over their head. He started looking, flying just over the treetops to the south of them, always moving, never staying in one place. He covered the area in a pattern he hoped would be unpredictable. We waited. There was no fire, and from where we were, there was no sign of life. Early in the war, the VC, that's the Viet Cong, would fire at anything in the air, but they learned fast that firing without hope of hitting anything only gave away their position, so they changed their tactics. I heard the Loach observer giving his report. I kept us at a distance as the Loach worked around. No sign of anyone to the east or north. Then he widened his search. He was about a half-click south of the position where our squad was hunkered down when suddenly some NVA on the ground thought he'd had enough and decided to bag an observer. As we flew into position to react, a fusillade of fire erupted from a wide area on the ground. Rounds hit my helo and passed on through. We launched one good batch of rockets, then I hauled up on the collective and got us out of there as fast as we could. One of my gunners called forward, said the jungle just came alive with fire. That was one hell of a large force of NVA down there. Our good grunt friends on the ground were not looking like very lucky fellows.
The gunship pilot now took position in the sky above Eagle 6 patrol, while the patrol prepared to withdraw in an attempt to disengage the enemy. Additional artillery support was needed as well. Precise coordination of the gunship and artillery was required to assure the survival of Eagle 6.
We heard the choppers radio in the information needed to blast the NVA in front of us. It sounded like we had company on two sides, to the south and west. We needed some more artillery fire, but the artillery was engaged pretty heavily in finishing the first NVA force to the south of the fire base. They had called in additional from another base directly south of Ferdinand, but there weren't any other bases within range of our location. Looked like Ferdinand would be busy for a while. You can't sit around all day, not here anyway. So we packed up and started to move quietly to the east in what we hoped would be a nice wide circle around those guys with the AK-47s. We was getting somewhere when all of a sudden... Automatic rifle fire, followed by a huge artillery shell that thumped the earth much too close for comfort. My RTO was on the horn right away. It was unbelievable. They were throwing harassment and interdiction fire to the east so to keep the way clear for us, only somewhere along the line some clown dropped the ball and didn't tell us. Somewhere in the middle of this, one of my boys went down with a head wound. I didn't know right away whether it was shrapnel or AK rounds. Didn't matter anyway. We weren't going to move too fast with him in that condition. We needed an airstrike and we needed medevac and fast. Looked around. Someone moved about 100 feet away and we all started busting caps at him. My RTO looked up at me. The Marines are on the way with a rescue team, a CH-53 and a couple of A-1s, but no airstrike. The Air Force responded negative. Seems they're busy somewhere else just now. I told my RTO to get the operator Ferdinand and find us someone who can drop some tonnage on these Gomers yesterday. The artillery hasn't stopped them, and if this place is too hot, the chopper won't be able to do a damn thing to help our wounded, much less us. I want to get back to the world in one piece, thank you.
Somewhere along the line, there'd been a break in communication. The fire base artillery had sent harassment and interdiction fire, commonly called H&I fire, to coordinates just east of the NVA's position in order to prevent them from advancing. Eagle 6 Patrol should have received orders to stay put until the initial volley of H&I fire had passed. But these orders never came, and a more severe catastrophe has been narrowly averted only by chance.
After the mix-up with harassment and interdiction fire, the artillery adjusted their fire and appeared to be doing some good. I brought my gunship in close and we proceeded to lay down some suppressive fire. I figured they were pretty safe for the moment, but they were going to need some more help before long. It had become clear that there was a major force down there. Maybe 2 companies of men, maybe more. In this location, it seemed pretty clear that there was only one logical objective. They were on their way to attack and overrun Fire Support Base Ferdinand.
In fact, the Americans have not been able to accurately estimate the true size of the opposing force. A full North Vietnamese battalion. More than 450 men is advancing on Fire Support Base Ferdinand. The NVA company to the southwest has been placed merely as a diversionary tactic, while the force to the north represents the main body of the aggressors. Fortunately, they have been discovered well in advance, but their force is large enough, their goal close at hand. They will definitely engage the Americans in a protracted battle. The combined might of all available U.S. forces and the power of sustained air support will be needed to defeat this very determined enemy.
It was kind of a long hop for us, but the call came in and we responded as quickly as we could. It was curious that the Air Force was suddenly so busy. I wasn't aware of any big operations that were going in their sector, but things happened fast. You never knew what could be up next. Before we took off, a FAC, that's a forward air controller, was sent over in a twin turboprop OV-10 Bronco. We were instructed that there was a large force at the coordinates, with a small patrol of Americans waiting for a medevac nearby. We wanted the FAC on hand to make certain we knew exactly where they wanted the goods placed, on the NVA, and not near our own men. Also, it looked like this job might take a few trips before it was completed. After takeoff, my flight of 4 Phantoms turned on a northwest heading.
As the F-4 pilot made his way in country, The forward air controller was already on the scene, sizing up the situation. His OV-10 Bronco represented the third generation of dedicated FAC aircraft used in Vietnam. Little O-1s and O-2s began this practice. Rarely armed, always highly vulnerable. The Bronco was considerably faster and carried some offensive weaponry along with its smoke-marking rockets.
When we were getting close in, the controller marked the target with one of his rockets. Made it real easy for us. In and out. It was a long way to go, but it worked out real easy. Back, we heard from the next flight that had taken off after us. They came in and the FAC marked another spot for them. The first pair strafed with cannon and rockets, and then the next guys came in with bombs. By this time, the NVA realized they had nothing to lose by shooting back. They threw a hail of fire at the second flight, anything they had on hand, even rocket-propelled grenades. The FAC got into it too, cutting through the foliage with its 4 fixed machine guns and anyone who dared to fire at him. We were coming back again, along with a whole string of other flights. Like I said, it's a delivery job, one after another. Just like doing the bunny hop, we each came by again and took our turn.
The NVA weren't fading quietly away this time. We had their location and there were too many of them to just disappear without a trace. But I had another worry. I couldn't maintain a perpetual holding action. Ammunition and fuel would both give out eventually. The Loach was kind of useless while I was otherwise engaged. We were in contact with our base and they requested we continue on to search for other troops. But I requested and received permission to stay on top of the patrol on the ground until the A-1s arrived. Fortunately, despite the rough start, everything worked out today. We kept watching our boys below, and eventually a pair of Spads, that's what we called the old A-1 Sky Raiders, appeared on the horizon. As we pulled out, we could see a Jolly Green Giant, that's the big CH-53 Sikorsky, heading in to pull out the wounded. Given the terrain in this area, it looked like it was going to be a job. But with the rescue equipment they had on the Jolly, I figured they were up to it. Our job was to get back to base and refuel. Then we were slated to resume our pink team role and check out the surrounding area for additional communist troops and artillery.
Nothing I can think of ever made me as happy as the sight of that CH-53 Jolly Green over our heads. We set off a smoke grenade for them so they could find us easy. The Huey gunship and the support from the Marine Phantoms kept the NVA busy. But it's not over till it's over. And it wasn't until the A1 showed up with that Jolly Green in tow that I really believed we had a good chance of getting out of there in one piece. The Jolly was there to extract my wounded man. They would hover just long enough to pull him out and then get out of there. Too much danger of enemy fire to stick around and pull out the rest of us. We were going to have to slog cross country until we could get to a workable landing zone that was cold. The A1 Sky Raiders kept the NVA away. If they hadn't, the Jolly wouldn't have been able to get in there at all. The guys in the Jolly were wonderful. They dropped the line with the Stokes litter. We loaded our man in as gently as we could. Then they pulled him up. Hanging above the forest, he was alone in that litter. He was a friend of mine, a good friend. I had a flash thought. One well-placed AK-47 round could finish him off right there. Him or me. I had a real bad feeling we were about to get hit. It would all be over for us right there. I knew it was coming. It's like the same fear short-timers get right before their tour is up. I closed my eyes for a moment. Then I looked straight up. The winch was winding the cable. It seemed like it was taking forever. Someone leaned out of the chopper to pull in the litter. I don't think I breathed again until he was safe inside and the Jolly pulled out and away. Of course, it wasn't over. We had 2 more days of fighting left. It took a good 4 hours to get far enough away from the NVA to an LZ, that's a landing zone, where we could be picked up. Later, after we got back to the fire base, we discovered the NVA had placed their own artillery on several hilltops just out of range of our 105s. Their big old 130mm field guns can throw a 76-pound HE projectile a good 30 kilometers. That gave them plenty to pound us with. But by the second day, we had pretty well fixed their locations and stopped them with air power. The ground battle never did get up to our doorstep, but a lot of their ammunition did. They sure tried, but we won the battle. If the winner was the guy who won the most battles, we would have walked away with the prize hands down. I never did find out why we couldn't get that airstrike from the Air Force on our first call. Sometimes there was so much going down all at once that there weren't any more planes available. Maybe that was it. I'm just thankful the Marines were there when we needed them. My squad was lucky to get out of this one with only the 1 man wounded. He turned out okay in the end. The wound looked to be a lot worse than it was, and they patched him up. I wish I could say it turned out that way all the time. Each man in my squad went home with the knowledge that he'd really earned his CIB, the Combat Infantryman's Badge. The badge that says you've spent time in actual combat. It's important. It says you faced fire and didn't run. It's a measure of courage. But none of us fought alone. Without the air support we received that day, I don't think any of us would have set foot on friendly ground again. I owe those guys my life, but I don't even know their names. I can only pay them with my memory. The memory of one day in one war when we all fought together and won.
The
Vietnam War taught new lessons to the professional soldiers of the American Armed Forces. Strategies had to be reworked. New tactics had to be devised. For the isolation of some outposts and the rapid development of situations, such as we've seen here, called for on-the-spot decisions. This meant that ground and air forces had to work together as never before. The success of such teamwork ultimately rests upon the shoulders of these individual fighting men. For it was their initiative and their courage which rose above the bureaucracy and the politics, and the rapidly changing command priorities which so characterized the war in Vietnam.